Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, the podcast that cogently uncovers the business problems each tech company was built to solve. Today, Sean speaks with Aman Khanna, founder of Profit Wheel, the company behind Consumr AI, an enterprise consumer intelligence platform that helps brands and agencies understand who their best customers are and how to generate more revenue from them. They will be discussing why there is a need for Consumr AI, the solutions they provide, and the use cases for them. After the show, head on over to the martechmatrix.com for show notes, contact information, and details on upcoming episodes. Now, get ready to enter the Matrix.
Aman, welcome into the Matrix. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for the invitation, Sean.
Great. We're excited to have you here. Before we dig into all the good stuff, can you tell us at a high level what Consumr AI is, and meant to do for your customers?
Absolutely. We started the company as Profit Wheel, which was meant to drive more profit for every brand that we work with, and hence Profit Wheel. We soon realized that most brands were scratching their heads thinking, I don't know what you're going to do for me, because basically you shine a spotlight on my consumers. You use AI in everything that you do. So we just thought it makes a ton of sense if we named our platform, our prima facie product, Consumr.ai. And that's the name that we promote, and that's our brand. Think of Alphabet and Google. That's exactly what Profit Wheel and Consumr.ai is. Consumr.ai is the one that we want in front of the public.
Got it. So what is, again, at a high level, what does Consumr AI do for its customers?
Good question. In a nutshell, we tell you more about your customers or your consumers, whoever you consider more important. But at the core of everything that we do, we try to be non-privacy invasive, and we are not. We do everything at a cohort level, and using walled gardens and APIs plugged into these walled gardens, we're able to tell you deterministically what your customers or consumers have been doing, liking, sharing, posting, so as to draw themes or interests or the ability to contextually target them, which will allow you to find more high-value customers or know the difference between your high-value and your mid-value customers.
Got it. Okay. There's a few different problems you're solving in that answer.
Yeah.
When you started the company, what was it that you were setting out to solve? What was the problem that you saw in the marketplace or in the ecosystem that you thought needed fixing?
It depends how much time do we have, but sure.
Well, you mentioned a few things, right? You mentioned walled gardens. You mentioned knowing your customers. You mentioned privacy. So what was the focus originally?
Exactly. All of these that you've just mentioned speak to a broken ecosystem. So me and the other two co-founders, we realized that we are a part of a broken ecosystem where everyone is compensated by percentage of media spend. And that was the first thing that irked us, because that's how we made our bread back in the day before Profit Wheel, before Consumr.ai. So we wanted to do something and bring a technology to the advertising world, specifically digital advertising world, that didn't rely on feasting on advertisers without driving up their revenue. That was basically the construct under which we started the company. We wanted to build a bridge between MarTech and AdTech. How can we use your existing customers to fuel your advertising to help you advertise better? That bridge between AdTech and MarTech is what we've attempted to create with Consumr.ai. So the biggest problem that we're trying to solve is, if you were to be given an oracle to answer a question, we will tell you what the question is that you should get answered if you want more valuable customers, by learning more about your existing customers. Most brands don't know this, but they're sitting on the most valuable asset, that is their own customers, which they have a very transactional relationship with. And that transactional relationship will have credit card details, transaction details, what they bought, the recency with which they bought it, etc. But they don't know anything more about that cohort of customers. Do they like to run marathons? Are they into yoga? Do they like horror movies? We can tell you all of that, because we can capture their deterministic social media behavior at a cohort level and then use that to do a variety of things. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. So we can dig into that a little bit. So you're basically looking at a brand's customer base. You're uncovering more information about their customers to help them figure out where are there common threads in the data about those customers beyond what they know through the transactions, and then saying, okay, go find more people that look like this. They're likely to be your new best customers.
Bang on. Thank you. You can do some sales for us. But yeah. I'm happy to give you some examples of how we were able to do exactly that for a variety of customers that live from the digital ecosystem in the world of finance to in the pharma healthcare sector. So happy to run the gamut of what you think is most relevant for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Give us an example because it sounds awesome, right? It sounds in theory, it's like great. Okay, so I know all the different things, like you said, the movies I like and the genres and sports and all the things that I'm into as a customer of a brand. But does that mean all their customers are into the same things, right? So give us an example of, and I don't know if you have any like a retailer because it's probably resonate more with our listeners. Um, uh, put that to work for us. How does that look for a retailer?
To give you a retail example, we actually won a client late summer last year that sells very expensive GPS-driven dog collars, and they were about to launch a new product. When we analyzed their most valuable customer base, we found a very interesting example of people who go fishing and camping. And they're like, wait, that makes a ton of sense because the people who buy these dog collars actually are outdoor people, and because we only focus on the outdoors, we don't know specifically what they're doing in the outdoors. And they decided that, hey, it might make sense for us to partner with some companies that make fishing and outdoor equipment, even though we sell dog collars. That was one example. But the other thing is using fishing and camping as the interest at that point when they were launching their new dog collar helped them get a lot more sales. And you wouldn't have associated per se fishing and camping and sky fishing, skyhook. I forget what all of these are called. I'm sorry, I'm a little ignorant about them, but that helped this retail customer drive a ton more sales, and they had some of their biggest days as approaching the retail season as it came about. That's just one example. I can give you many, many more, but this is the one that comes to mind when you mentioned retail.
Got it. So interesting. Like, what was the brand's perception or reaction? You came back to them. You said, "Look, we see in the data. There's what like I guess like how many users? Let's say they have 100 customers. What
Mhm.
percentage of those users needed to show an affinity to fishing and outdoors and camping for that data to be valuable to the brand? Do
Actually,
you
it's a
tell
very
them
good
that?
question. Yeah, so it's not what percentage of their customers, it's of their entirety of their customers. If fishing and camping had a base index of the entire US population of, let's say, for example, 10, how much above or below 10 is their cohort of customers? And when we were able to index them at a significantly higher amount, we can say that compared to the general populace of the United States, fishing and camping index is really high for your customers, your high value customers. As a result, they tend to lean towards that. So we would recommend you buy that interest across the social media channels, and of course, we help them across other landscapes such as Google as well.
I see. So thank you for the retail example, but are there other verticals that you target? Does it work for any vertical, any
Yeah.
category or brand? Can you give us some more color there?
Absolutely. So we have a life insurance player. We have an investment group that does high-end investments from retail institutes as well as individuals that are high-net individuals. When we unpack their first-party assets, we found some very interesting things. For the insurance player, we found that a majority of their conversions are women. They didn't know that, and that was an insight in and of itself because they're a traditional advertiser. But we also help them recognize that filmmaking, desserts, shirts, some very non-intuitive interests were being consumed by way of content of their top decile customers. We were able to magnify this not just for them to create better content, write better creative, but also help them win more high value life insurance potential prospects. We did the same thing for the investment group that plays in the finance space. They too were looking for net new high net individuals or folks that would be willing to invest millions of dollars with them. Now, given that their subset is relatively small, it isn't in the millions of people. We were able to understand from the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that they have. Again, at a cohort level, we were able to understand what are their likes, dislikes, what are their passions, that so that they could find more people like them. And in this case, more often than not, you're vying for a lead, not necessarily a sale, which is all that they care for at the moment. They're trying to build their funnel stages as well. So it goes from various levels of the funnel stages to various tiers, from direct to consumer to B2B as well.
Got it. Got it. So on that life insurance example, how did they not know that the majority of their customers were women? Are you saying that the buyers of the policies or the policies that were being bought for or
Let
against?
me give you another example. We worked with a very large laptop and server manufacturer, and when we unpacked their data, we found that a specific brand of their gaming laptop, almost 100% of the customer was a middle-aged woman. And they were kind of shocked because they only advertised to teenagers that are heavy-set gamers. But when we analyzed the data, the people who actually handled the credit card were the mothers.
Hmm.
It's when we help delineate and distinguish between consumer and customer. The person who swipes the credit card becomes the customer. The person who consumes your product becomes the consumer. If you can validate the difference between the two, like for example, people who visit your site are likely going to be your consumers. People who purchase might be the parents of said consumer. When we were able to analyze the difference between the two, we helped, including this life insurance player, know what it means to advertise to one, but have the other one be the decision maker or the credit card swiper. And that's exactly what happened here as well.
So you're saying in that computer example that the manufacturer was able to market to the mothers or the parents of the teenagers with specific messaging to make it easier for almost the teenager to get buy-in from their parents to buy the computer, right?
Exactly.
That's fascinating. What are some of the product, like what are some of the other services that you offer? Are there multiple products or multiple services? So we talked about identification of who your customers are. What else does Consumr AI offer its brands?
It's where it starts from. So think of it this way: when we get a brand, they're interested in knowing who their customers are. We recently did this for uh, a company that does outdoor equipment, especially as the summer approaches. And we found that their audience is different on Meta than it is on Pinterest. So what we were able to do was that, and this is human behavior that's been proven now by data, people on Meta do certain things, the same set of people do different things on Pinterest. But what are those things in each of these social media platforms? We're able to identify that and put it down to the interest consumed by that cohort in these individual platforms to help them grow scale very, very uniquely in a bespoke manner for each of these platforms, for each brand and for each product line. And that's one of the other services that we offer is that, hey, how do you not only know your best customers, how do you know the difference between your best and your next best customer in one platform, and how do you expand that to the next platform? Because if you're present in Meta, chances are you want to be present in Pinterest, TikTok, Snap, um, LinkedIn soon. But also, how do you then use this and parlay this into the programmatic space? How do you use it for another walled garden, such as Performance Max, which now exists in Google and Microsoft? How do you then utilize this information for a DSP buy that you could buy programmatically on any player?
Got it. So what are some different ways, you mentioned a few in quickly, but like what are some different ways that brands can leverage this data, right? It's one thing to say, okay, my customers surprisingly are women, and then you can explain it. Why? Okay, does it make any sense? Oh, yes, it does. They're the buyers, right? I get that. But what are some other ways that a brand might use the data to acquire new customers or nurture an audience?
It's a very good question. Sometimes, and we get this quite a bit, is that, hey, I play heavy in the retail space and it is outside the brick and mortar stores of my own store or my own website that I have a majority of my purchases. How can you help me grow the offline piece, and how can you help me grow my online D2C piece? That's a very common question. Who should I partner with from a sponsorship perspective? Who should be my key influencers? Now that I know these are the habits, interests, passions of my most valuable customers, who should I strike strategic alliances with in order to make that happen? More importantly, if I were to just take out the market research that is being done, which is either survey, panel, probabilistic, or scraped, how can you help me get more deterministic, valuable data that is based on actual behavior that has been observed as opposed to guesswork or sampled or surveyed? These are all various use cases that we find ourselves against because we enter usually from a media activation perspective. What we're slowly finding is that all media activation is the result of some level of research. Now we can affect the research budgets as well and help them get more better research in their system. So we're now encroaching a new avenue in terms of who we go after. So market research companies, or people who would like market research companies to do certain things for them, to tell them what they think they believe their consumer to be or who they are. We are now able to either augment or replace that. Now, I'm not saying that that's a competitor, but I'm just saying that, look, at the end of the day, when you use AI and you use cohort level, non-invasive, deterministic data based on what everyone is doing, so-called cohort in these walled gardens, that has a myriad of use cases that sometimes I believe we're yet to uncover. Media activation and expansion into other platforms, market expansion from one country to another, or one market geographically to another, as well as now as we're finding content to creative creation, and then market research. These are all valid use cases.
Got it. You mentioned cohort level a few times. Explain what that means, and what's different about cohort level versus what brands are accustomed to.
Yeah, I try to make it a point to repeat that as many times as I can in case I get mistaken for either a data onboarder that does user one to user two, or user A to user one mapping and finding that offline person online at a user level, or I get mistaken more still for Cambridge Analytica that went on to discern what users' preferences, likes were to be used for political reasons. Everything that we do has to be in the hundreds of thousands of people. Because anything lower than that would be invasive of their privacy. Hence, a cohort is how we refer to what we do in terms of a data pull. And we also don't intermingle clients' data, and we do everything on the cloud. So we make sure that every instance that we set up for Consumr.ai is a standalone instance for each client.
Got it. So if you have to have large data sets, right, to build these cohorts, what's the ideal customer look like to you in terms of size of brand? Do you look at revenue? Do you look at this number of visitors coming to their website? How do you determine if a brand is a good fit for your services?
Well, that's a very good question. There are quite a few things that construe statistical significance. They must have a digital event that is a conversion event for us to be able to track it. It has to be tracked, and they should be potentially using it for their digital media, or they should have some sort of a digital media tracker, even if it's not being used to buy digital media. For example, Google Analytics, Meta, Pinterest, TikTok, all of these platforms already have pixels in place. So we usually set that as a baseline, and it's easier because then there's no implementation. We don't own our own pixel. We don't actually track the number of users. But from a statistical significance perspective, what we expect is that they typically have 100 such events taking place on a daily basis that are tracked via the pixel. And then, of course, from a baseline perspective, if the cohort of individuals that would be considered of value, let's say, for example, it's a high quality visitor base, the history of their site should have had, let's say, 100,000 of those visitors, which could be put into what's called a custom audience, and we can create a lookalike off of that. And that's what we access, the lookalike. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So going back to the how a brand uses the data, right? It's more about. It sounds like it's more about understanding your audience broadly, in groups, cohorts, and then leveraging that information to do something with it, rather than. This is not about one-to-one marketing necessarily, right? This is about understanding groups of people, saying, "Oh, there's an opportunity amongst people that look like this or do that, or live here or work there," rather than say, okay, I'm going to target Sean. He's a podcast host and a business owner, with one message. It's not about the one-to-one in this case.
Correct. Think of it this way. What do most CDPs also do? They collect row level data at an individual level. And what do advertisers or brands try to do? They try to find themes within a multitude of rows that they could then package them together in a cohort and advertise to them. Well, I mean, need I say more? We're doing all of that without you having to invoke a CDP or doing everything at a row level. We capture data. We see data that's already captured, obfuscated, is non-PII driven, matched into these walled gardens. We unpack it straight from there, and we tell you the themes of the interests that are common to those cohorts, or not, or the lack of themes that are common in multiple cohorts. and we help you then find exactly what those audiences are into to help you find more like them.
So not to pry too much into your secret sauce, how do you get that data out of the walled gardens? I mean, we typically think of walled gardens as being locked, right? How do you get it out?
We use publicly available APIs. It is the nature of the call of these APIs where we're able to map what that cohort does to every single interest. So for example, Meta has 1.2 million interests. We stack rank them for each cohort. So imagine one call will have hundreds of thousands of queries associated with it. Same thing goes for Google, which has a few 100,000 categories or interests. Snap only has 200 and something. So each platform will have their own taxonomy of these interest passions that they know of each of their handles. So, for example, Meta has 3.2 billion people in their identity graph, and they have 32,000 data points on each of these users. What we're able to do is call on these data points at a cohort level and then assimilate how each of them index against the general population of that country. So what that allows us to do is, in a mathematical way, very, very quickly, within seconds, give a very clear picture to the brand about who these customers, consumers are, and how they can potentially find more like them. The secret sauce lies in how these calls were made, and was done by my CEO and co-founder Gautam, who is far more intelligent, that deserves more time in the sun than I'll ever do.
Fair enough. It seems like you've got your hands on some pretty amazing, powerful data between the walled gardens and the brands themselves. How does that data, how does that information help consumer AI improve the products? And how does that influence the roadmap of products that you're thinking about or building?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel as if the only constant in our industry is change. You said it at the top of this call. The world is going cookieless. The walled gardens are getting bigger. GDPR, CCPA is making government regulations even more increasingly difficult for advertisers and give them a headache. iOS 14 lacks data sharing between different parties that previously used to share data. All of this stems from the fact that this fractured ecosystem, which has been preying on advertisers to increase their media spend, as well as the lack of transparency in these walled gardens, has caused a big earthquake, for lack of a better word. And what that's required us to do is to always future-proof our product. So, for example, before we launched the product 3 years ago, we were cookieless. We never relied on it. Our API calls and our API integrations are audited on a quarterly basis so that we don't do anything that is below board. We are constantly looking to increase our gamut of platform integrations. So, for example, when we started the company, we were a Meta-only player. And now, of course, besides Meta, we have Pinterest, TikTok, Snapchat, Google, DV360, Google Ads, PMax, now including search themes within PMax, as well as the Trade Desk, and growing as we speak. Each one of them now has multi-pair functionality, which means we support different types of campaigns in each of these platforms. But more importantly, at the core of it, we want to give the brand the ease of use. If they know how to use Google to search for something, they should know how to use our platform. And again, the other thing that we also pride ourselves with is it takes less than 60 seconds to implement us, and it takes less than 14 days for us to prove our efficacy to anyone who has ever tried our product. And then any user can get trained within 30 minutes. That is the core of every new product line that we build. But hearing from the marketplace, as I said, we've expanded our footprint across these various product lines and new platforms, which now we hope to continue doing in the months to come.
Got it. So when a brand's onboarded with you, and you're collecting all of these insights from their customers, how do they put that data to work? Right. So I get the execution piece, but are they doing that through the consumer AI platform? Is this data they download? Does it get pushed to their different walled garden accounts? Like, how do they execute on the learning?
Very good question. We try to make everything seamless, and that's where AI comes in. We've built APIs that will allow you to, by the push of a button, activate on each of these learnings from ground zero. So, for example, you have a cohort of very valuable customers. You want to learn from that and make that the jumping off point, and then bid on these interests on on one of these wall gardens, it'll do that. And then it'll do what natively no platform allows, which is down to an interest level. It'll tell you what's performing, what's not, and help you swap in, swap out by another push of a button. So it diminishes the amount of human effort that is required. But then we also help with creative, what creative is performing, and based on first party consumption of what people are actually consuming within that, let's say, ad set or ad group, what would you recommend I change the theme or the creative to? And it'll do it for you. These are also some things that are also that we're augmenting as we speak to help get more use cases and get a wider footprint for a brand to use us.
So is a brand's account within Consumr AI plugged into all of their media accounts across different platforms, so that you can just do all the work and then push it right into their campaigns at like a campaign set level?
That's exactly what we call implementation. At the time of implementation, all we ask for is to be given token access to their accounts, their media accounts, and once that access is granted, we can read and write into that account if they please, which will allow us to use our APIs to directly plug these recommendations directly into their accounts and speak directly to the walled gardens, so as to avoid, as you said, the manual download and the human effort behind it.
Do the brands typically manage their campaigns through your platform, or are they still logging into those individual platforms, or both?
They can do both. We offer the functionality of doing it all through our platform. We're not a campaign management platform, which is the reason why we shy away from that, because it's not for ease of use of managing these platforms in one roof. It is primarily to allow you to get consumer insights that you can activate on based on what these platforms are saying or what these consumers are doing in these platforms.
Got it. So when you when a company starts working with you, you said you can prove your effectiveness within 14 days. What is the measurement of success? So after 14 days, what is the key metric that a brand's looking at, and also longer term, to determine the value that Consumr AI brings to their business?
Given we're not an agency, nor are we the in-house marketing staff of a company, we typically say, "Hey, what are you doing now? And why don't we go head to head with whatever you're doing now versus our tech?" And you decide. In most cases, like for example, Meta offers what are called experiments, where you can experiment test A with test B cells, and these cells are non-contaminated, and we'll see who wins. You give everything the same, albeit the targeting is different using Consumr.ai, and you use BAU targeting in one. We'll find out who wins. And in almost all cases, we tend to come out on top. But that's where we say, hey, look, we'll enter because of this performance conversation, but we'll end this performance conversation because we want this to be the new BAU. So any headwinds that you face, we would have faced too. And as a result, what we tend to find is that while we'll use this as an entry Trojan horse, it is expected that we don't do this again, because we want the client to be convinced that their marketing efforts are now having a new BAU or a new business as usual, which is driven by Consumr.ai, while we have unpacked their first party data and used this AI technology to help you know what are the ingredients for your most valuable customers moving forward as well.
So just to talk about the test a little bit more, so you plug in all their data through all their platforms. You said it takes 60 seconds to get set up, and then you're analyzing all of their customer data to understand something about their users, right? You're looking for commonality, right? This is a classic instance of a brand doesn't know what the brand doesn't know, right? They have no idea what they're going to find because they haven't mined the data yet. And your Consumr AI surfaces up information about audiences. Say, perhaps they didn't know that they had a large audience of men 25 to 34 who had an interest in classic cars and fly fishing, right? That's completely out of the targeting of any campaign they've ever run. That's a new audience that now they can target on Meta. Let's say that maybe they're not, or maybe on Meta they're just targeting men 25 to 54. Boom, in the U.S. done, right? Very broad. Maybe there's a little bit more specific data in there, but you're giving them something new, something more granular, something specific about a large group of users to target. And that's what they're comparing, right? So business as usual versus sort of this new audience or audiences. How many audiences do you recommend a brand test with the Consumr AI recommendations? Does it just depend on how many surfaces, or do you recommend a minimum?
No, it's a good question. It's usually the latter. Depends on how many they surface, but typically it's top 30 interests that are the jumping off point. But like I said, that's literally the jumping off point. And to your point, right, the earlier analogy that came to mind, and pardon the violence behind it, is there's a spray and pray that happens with prospecting, where the spray and pray is, hey, let me go broad, male, 25 to 54, that lives in the United States. Wow, that's a lot of people. Whereas to your point, we come in with a scalpel. We're like, all right, male 25 to 34 that is interested in fly fishing, that is interested in marathon running, or that is interested in manga comics. Who would have thunk that this amongst 27 others would be the jumping off point? And then within a week or within a week's time, when we have enough conversions that we can see these are the interests that actually work really well, let's keep these, let's eradicate those that didn't work and replace them with ones related to the ones that we found working. Do that as a cycle, and that becomes your new optimization schema. This is, again, a little bit difficult because interest-based targeting across these walled platforms gets a bad rep, because if you're in an industry, let's say you sell, for example, fly fishing equipment, chances are you'll be buying the interest fly fishing. But what if I told you that you should be buying, I don't know, manga comics or yoga or marathon, something that is completely unrelated to your product? But that's what your cohort of most valuable customers consume. One, it takes a leap of faith for brands to say, hey, why should I buy something that is not related to what I've done? And B, can you prove to me that this works? And that's exactly what we do in that trial period, where we're like, look, it's that leap of faith that we're willing to say, once you're engaged with us, you will see this day in and day out, because a human being is three-dimensional. You're seeing the one transactional relationship you have with them. Now we're three-dimensionalizing them and telling you what else is behind that cohort of that customer that you know.
I think what's interesting and maybe worth calling out here is when we think about interests, that's different than contextual, right? So, if you sell fly fishing gear and you're targeting users that have an interest in manga, that's not like you're saying serve fly fishing ads around manga content, um, which is adult animation, right? That's the adult comic books, or what do they call it? What does my son call it? Graphic novels, right?
Correct.
So that's very different on serving ads to people who have that declared interest than going out to a website that has specific content around the animated novels or the graphic novels, right? Because that would be out of context. I could see why the brand might not want to do that, but we're just talking about the user interest that's declared. It's self-declared. They said so there is a big difference, and so it's a leap of faith, but it's not a branding issue. It's just a
Right.
matter of understanding.
We're not saying next to manga comic ads in Facebook, put your ad there. No. People who have consumed content on manga comics and are interested, you want to reach out to those people. It's an affinity of users. For that same reason, we've now actually expanded and learned, to your point, and in fact, to this exact point, where we understand this is your social media behavior as witnessed and observed by your first party cohort of most valuable customers. Let's now translate that into IAB affinity segments for the non-Google DSP landscape. And then for the Google landscape, we've got Google affinity segments. That means that these people, as disclosed by Google or other IAB players that buy contextual media or buy DSP media, these people have been flagged as they have an affinity for fly fishing or manga comics, right? So in each of these affinity segments or IAB affinity segments, let's find those hand raisers that have clearly shown interest in these places, and let's reach out to them for fly fishing, for example. I don't know why we're stuck on that fly fishing example.
Yeah. You started it. I don't fly fish. No, that makes total sense. I can see how that can be super valuable for a brand that's in a highly competitive market, right? Where inventory around content related to their product is just super expensive. Their competition's always there. This is a way for them to maybe buy less expensive inventory, target the same audience, and not be cluttered around your competitors' ads. So it makes a ton of sense. How does a brand get started? I mean, you made it sound very easy, right? 60 seconds to get started, but what's required of a brand to get started with Profit Wheel?
Just contact us and we'll tell you, we'll give you instructions on how you can just give us partner access to your advertising accounts. And then from that point onwards, we'll do a demo of your data to you, prove to you that this can work. And once most clients, when they see, or prospects, when they see their own data being served back to them within seconds or minutes of this happening, they're usually awed. And some of them have a gut check that like, yeah, that makes sense. I always thought that, but I didn't have data behind it. Or they're like, I've never seen something like this. How do we activate? How do we then test this out? And we begin the conversation there.
Must be really fun when you get those naysayers. There's always those people out there on the brand side that I know my audience. I know exactly who they are. I know what they're into. And you can't tell me anything more than I know. Trust
Yep.
me, you do not know what you do not know. It's impossible to know what you don't know. And this is a great way to find out. And look, if it validates it, great, then you can sleep easier at night and you can tell your board that you know for sure and you're right and this is who they are. But chances are you're going to learn something. So I would encourage people to at least sit up and listen. All right, I think we're going to leave it there. I think this has been a great introduction to consumer AI and the value it brings to brands and how they can benefit from it. At least give it a 2-week trial and take the test and see what kind of data you can get back. And maybe you'll be surprised. So with that, I thank you, Aman, for being here inside the Matrix and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you so much, Sean. Appreciate the opportunity and love the questions. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
This episode of the MarTech Matrix was brought to you by the Cogent Collective, a community of marketing and e-commerce leaders. Learn more at cogentcollective.com. For show notes and information on upcoming episodes, head on over to themartechmatrix.com. If you would like to learn more about the companies appearing on this podcast and see if they're a good fit for your company, send Sean a note at sean@cogentcollective.com. New episodes of the MarTech Matrix podcast will drop every Monday, so be sure to subscribe with your favorite podcast network so you can stay on top of what's happening in the Matrix.